Animal Protection Project at Lewis and Clark Law School during the 2024 to 25 academic year, one of whom, Valeria, is also our panelist for today. Our other two panelists for today, Ms. Gori Molecki and Paula Cardoso, served as country experts for the report. In terms of our agenda, I'll start off with talking a little bit about our work in the Farmed Animal Protection Project, as well as our vision and goals for this specific project that we're discussing today. I will then introduce our three panelists who will take turns briefly introducing their work around litigation in their respective countries. We will then engage in a roundtable style discussion on strategic litigation against industrial animal ag in Brazil, India, and Mexico, and we will conclude with audience Q&A. If you have any questions as the panelists present, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and then we'll get to them towards the end of this panel. The Farmed Animal Protection Project offers Lewis and Clark law students a two-semester experiential learning opportunity to concentrate on farmed animal protection and to develop lawyering and other professional skills used by animal protection advocates. At the end of the academic year, projects produced through this course are shared with the public to increase awareness and to aid other farmed animal advocacy efforts within the movement. The project we're discussing today is the Farmed Animal Protection Project's first public-facing research output. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to talk a little bit about the issue to provide some context. Industrial animal agriculture has become one of the most defining and unfortunately troubling features of the global food system. This system, which is marked by intensification, mechanization, and vertical integration, attempts to maximize animal production while minimizing costs for the industry. Unfortunately, the global industrial animal agriculture industry has become extremely successful in accomplishing this goal of raising record-breaking numbers of animals each year. And just for, again, numbers and context, approximately 85 billion land animals are slaughtered for food annually around the world, the vast majority being chickens, followed by pigs, sheep, and cows. And I'm not even, including farmed fish in this analysis. Factory farming, as the system is sometimes called, imposes really steep and very well-documented costs. It confines animals in extreme restrictive conditions that prevent natural behaviors and normalizes painful procedures like castration, debeaking, dehorning without anesthesia. It also drives major environmental harms, including deforestation, biodiversity loss, and water pollution from manure and chemical runoff, while nearby communities face noxious odors and elevated risks of respiratory illness and allergies. The animal agriculture sector is a significant contributor to climate change through methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide emissions across the supply chain. Factory farming also creates serious public health and worker safety risks, from accelerating antimicrobial resistance through routine non-therapeutic administration of antibiotics to increasing zoonotic disease risks, while exposing workers to dangerous conditions and exploitation. So in short, there are many, many issues with the system. And the system in the shape and form it takes today originated in Europe and then was refined in the US, but we see it rapidly spreading to other parts of the world, partly driven by an increased demand for meat consumption. And in light of this, it's increasingly important for advocates to try and combat industrial animal ag in these different countries before it becomes entrenched in their cultural and political fabric. And of course, because we're lawyers, one of the many ways to do this, and one of our favorite ways to do this, is through legal tools like litigation. So, and kind of linked to that, while we do have some animal law litigation in the US and EU, there remains this analytical gap around how litigation strategies are being deployed in other global South countries. And so this project seeks to fill that gap by examining litigation strategies in four countries: Brazil, India, Mexico, and Zimbabwe. We selected these countries because they represent a mix of regions and they're major agriculture producers. Additionally, while each jurisdiction has its own unique challenges, our goal was to select a sample of countries that are representative of the unique cultural, economic and food security and welfare issues facing the global south. Through this project, we aim to address how legal strategies and approaches in these four countries have succeeded or failed in combating industrialized animal farming and what legal or socio-cultural factors influence these outcomes. And while we do have experts today from Brazil, India, and Mexico, unfortunately, our expert from Zimbabwe could not join us. However, I did want to give a shout out to the excellent information about Zimbabwe that we have included in the full report and the companion project overview, which Professor Senatori is gonna has linked in to in the chat. So I highly recommend checking that out. And so, without further ado, I'll go on to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Ms. Gauri Molekhi, who is an Indian animal law expert and strategic litigator with over 3 decades of experience advancing animal protection through courts, public policy, and institutional reform. She serves as trustee of People for Animals, India's largest animal welfare organization. Her litigation has contributed to landmark reforms and the notification of several national rules under India's principal animal welfare legislation, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Ms. Molekhi teaches animal protection law at National Academy of Legal Studies and Research and trains judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement agencies across India. She founded and leads the Ahimsa Fellowship, India's first fellowship dedicated to building the next generation of animal protection leaders. In 2018, she was awarded the Nari Shakti Puraskar by the President of India for her contributions to strengthening animal protection. Our second panelist is Paula Cardoso, who is the co-chair of the International Animal Law Committee of the American Bar Association and LATAM General Counsel for the nonprofit farmed animal protection organization, Mercy for Animals. She joined the organization in 2017 and in 2022 created MFA's strategic litigation program in Brazil. Paula has over 15 years of legal experience, having worked in law firms and as a pro bono lawyer for activists in various social justice movements. She holds an LLM in animal law from our very own Lewis and Clark Law School. Last but not the least, our third panelist is Valeria Picasso, who is a veterinarian who completed her MSL in animal law at Lewis and Clark Law School. Her work and interests are grounded in a one welfare framework and span animal rights, environmental sustainability, food policy, interspecies communication, and expanding access to veterinary care in historically marginalized communities. Welcome, Gauri, Paula, and Valeria, and over to you, Gauri.
Thank you, Hira, and hi, Paula and Valeria. People for Animals, the organization that I have been associated with for the past 30 years, has been using litigation strategically. I'll just tell you a glimpse of our strategy, really. We use litigation, we go to courts as a tool towards an end. It's never an end in itself to sort of sue the government and we'll teach them. It's always as a part of a larger strategy, and we never stop, good constant dialogue with the stakeholders, with the government and the industry stakeholders, so that the matters never get adversarial and we all move towards, as far as possible, a solution. We have, of course, in the past 10 years made some landmark changes in the litigation scenario. For instance, we got the first law in India, environmental albeit, but the first law to govern or to regulate poultry farms. We got another law a national law, of course, to govern dairy farms. Pet trade, of course, besides industrial animal agriculture, livestock markets, how to dispose caged property animals that have been treated cruelly and have been rescued by police. All of these laws have basically come about as a result of our litigation and working with the government side by side. We don't just sue them, we also lobby at the same time, work with the politicians, get the right solutions, and I think the edge is that we have the country's best legal minds who work from our side, so either pro bono or at very little or no cost. So the top 20 lawyers of the country, they basically take up animal causes at our request. So that I think is one of our biggest achievements, that we have got such a big support group. Thanks. Long way to go, but we're taking some steps.
Thank you for sharing that. Paula, do you want to introduce your work maybe?
Sure. As Hira mentioned, I'm Paula Cardoso, and I work at Mercy for Animals for visually impaired people or anyone who cannot see the screen. I'm a Latin woman with dark brown hair, dark brown eyes, light olive skin. I'm wearing a green shirt. And over the past years, my work has focused on building innovative legal solutions to fill a critical gap in the farmed animal protection movement in Brazil, which is strategic litigation. Part of my team is here today, which makes me really, really happy and proud. And so we've been navigating the Brazilian legal landscape for just a couple of years now, 3 years now, since the launch of the program. And as you know, Brazil is a global agricultural powerhouse, and unfortunately, billions of animals suffer daily from horrible industry practices here. And However, and our legal framework offers some unique tools here in Brazil. We are one of the very few countries in the world with a constitution that explicitly prohibits animal cruelty regardless of the species. And also, we have some very interesting court precedents that are evolving rapidly. For instance, court have started to recognize non-human animals as sentient beings with intrinsic value and dignity, and granting them the capacity to be a party in legal proceedings. And as we've seen in some landmark cases, recent landmark cases. And here at MFA specifically, we don't just rely on anti-cruelty laws, even though this is still our main focus. But we also try to connect animal law with environmental, consumer, human rights. And we use three main strategies for that. The first is intersectionality. Just to provide you an example, our Superior Court of Justice established that the mere possibility of harm to human health from untreated animal waste is enough to constitute the crime of pollution, the criminal pollution offense, which significantly lowers the evidentiary threshold to hold factory farms accountable for their practices. The second strategy that we use is offensive litigation. And by that, I mean challenging systemic animal cruelty directly. For example, we do some significant work in the fight against the export of live animals by sea. And I don't know how familiar you are with live export, but it is a trade that subjects cattle to tremendous suffering and drives deforestation in Brazil. This specific case is still pending. We are also participating in a lawsuit that challenges the recent self-control law, which is pretty much the meat industry self-specting their practices. And we claim that this violates the state's constitutional duty to prevent animal cruelty and public health. And we also use evidence that are produced in our undercover investigations. And finally, we also use defensive litigation. We actively defend animal protection NGOs and undercover investigations from industry retaliation, such as lawsuits claiming moral damages, and ensuring the public's right to know about factory farming and to protect their right to know, right? In conclusion, in our experience, Brazil shows a very promising pathway. And I think that our experience here can also be a good example for other populous agricultural nations the integrative and strategic approach can work. And I couldn't agree more with what Gary said, that litigation is not an end in itself. It should always be used as a tool to complement the work, the government relations work, corporate relations work. So that's how we perceive strategic litigation at MFA as well. And we do think that focusing in animal welfare is still key, but also linking it to environmental sustainability and human rights, so that we can build a stronger and more resilient, cases. So yeah, that's pretty much what a summary of what we are doing here. Thank you so much, and I really look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Paula. Kind of also going back, Gauri, to what you said, I think like when we were interviewing you for the report, you described it as a carrot and stick approach, and that's like what we've also, that's the exact terminology we ended up using in the report, because that's kind of exactly how it is, right? You engage with agencies, but then litigation can be a powerful tool to actually force them to do what their statutory obligations are. And thanks to Paula for sharing all the amazing work you're doing in Brazil. And I have lots of questions about those cases, especially the live animal export cases. But first, we want to hear from Val. So, yeah, over to you, Val.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and for your interest. Thank you also, Carlos and Hira, for the wonderful presentation. I am going to give like a brief overview of industrial animal agriculture in my country, which is Mexico, and discuss some of the main strategies towards litigation that I found promising or that have potential. Next slide, please. So Mexico is among the world's top livestock producers, and it is sadly expanding. The general trend is toward becoming more intensive. So these numbers that I put here in the map, they're the numbers of animals that are slaughtered annually. So we can think about those numbers in a much bigger way when we're dealing with animals that are being raised in the system at this time. So the industry is characterized by large-scale, vertically integrated operations, and this is especially prevalent within the poultry and pig farming practices. We are the fifth largest egg producer, and 90% of those hens are still in cages. And still, customary husbandry practices, as we were mentioning before with the other panelists, still are prevalent without the use of anesthetics. So tail docking, dehorning, and castration. And there is no crate-free regulations. The use of cages is still predominant. So this is a bit of the overview, and this presents a bit of a dire setting. Next slide, please. As far as legislation, there are multiple laws in Mexico, but these are the main three that I found could be more relevant to our cases. So basically, the Ley General de Sanidad Animal, this is the Federal Animal Health Act, and this is the basis for other animal welfare legislation. However, the framework is more based on animal health and food safety, and it tends to just ensure the public's health. So we'll talk a bit more about it, I hope, in the discussion. NOM 033, this provides methods for humane slaughter, and the Animal Protection Law of Mexico City, which was recently passed in 2022. This is quite a progressive law from what I could find. The challenges, though, are that the laws are not often implemented and there is a lack of enforcement. So oversight by agencies remains very limited and a critical issue. Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So some states have recognized animals as sentient beings in their constitutions, but when I was doing my research, around 5 states, a handful of states had recognized this. However, in December of 2024, the president signed a set of constitutional amendments that formally recognize animals within the Constitution. So this is a landmark moment, not only because it sets Mexico apart from other countries, but it also acknowledges the inherent value of all animals, meaning that they're all worthy of respect and protection. So this is quite a huge milestone, and I'll be talking a bit more about this in the discussion, hopefully. I know that Paula mentioned that animals are also included within Brazil's constitution, so we can definitely chat about it a bit more. And here I put 3 basic articles that the reforms involve. Article 73, I particularly highlighted that one because it establishes that Congress has now clear authority to create legislation on animal welfare and protection. And my last slide, it's basically on what I found as prevailing or more of topics of interest within litigation and cases. So basically, some of the cases I found related to cultural practices such as bullfighting, which I know it's a huge issue in some Latin American countries still, and religious rituals such as Santeria. So courts have had to face balancing these animal protection laws with cultural expression and religious freedom for the people. And cases also show that advocates want stronger oversight and a better regulation all over. I specifically found one case relating to egg industry regulation and labeling. And also we'll talk a bit about amparo actions a bit more on the discussion, I hope. But it relates to the fact that courts have been asked to compel agencies to act and fulfill their obligations. So yes, I'll be happy to touch on specific cases moving forward. Thank you. This is it.
Thank you so much, Val. And so, yeah, so now I was hoping we could just have kind of a little bit of a structured discussion. So I'll just ask our panelists some questions, and then hopefully, we can draw out some common themes and get a sense of what strategic litigation has looked like in all these countries. So the first question I have, Corey, is for you. So what I am curious about, like, the mindset of policymakers, of judges, of the public when it comes to industrial animal agriculture. Like, what are all decision making makers, including the public, because public, in a democracy is a decision maker. How do they perceive the industry? And if you could change one thing, not necessarily a law, but a mindset, what would that be? What would that change be? Oh, sorry, you muted.
Hi, sorry, thanks. So, if we have to change one thing in the mindset of people, I think that would be shifting away from sentimentalism and just accountability, fixing accountability in people. That is more important. So we have to look at animal suffering as a governance failure, not as something that is an optional morality. So, shifting away from, oh, look how cruelly these animals are being treated and let's save them, it has to be an interconnectedness that has to be demonstrated scientifically. There have to be very strong empirical scientific reasons why, in the short run, in the medium run, and in the long run, this is going to be economically bad. Cruelty is going to be health-wise bad. It's going to be morally bad. It's going to be a law and order issue. And every which way society wants to project itself as civilized is going to crumble if we walk on that trajectory. So it has to be sort of divorced from private morality and a matter of choice of people, whether they want to be lovers of animals or not lovers of animals. It has to be the responsibility of each civilized individual to respect the lives of other species. I believe that mindset, if that comes in, then everything will fall into place. And that's what we strive in courts. Never to go with a bleeding heart or, just making an appeal for empathy. We always indict a failed or broken system in court. We challenge, officers for failure of statutory duties. And had it not been for that and sheer corruption in many cases, we would see a lot better, regulation of the way animals are treated. So that I believe is one of the biggest mindsets I want to change.
I think that's such an important point. Also, because another theme that we've noticed, and this is true also for the US, is this idea of agricultural exceptionalism. And there's a lot of scholarship around it as well. It's not just animal welfare or animal rights activists who think of it sentimentally, but oftentimes policymakers also think of it sentimentally, and like from the opposite perspective, where the idea is, well, just because this is an industry that provides us with food or food products, like we can't touch this industry. And I think you're absolutely right. Like that idea needs to be challenged, that it's just about one thing. It's not just about one thing. It's a broken system that's harming many different aspects of society. So that's a really profound and important point. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Paula, my next question is for you, which is about the transport of live animals by sea and the litigation around that in Brazil, which has really been so interesting. If I understand correctly, has happened at multiple kind of levels at the judiciary already. So could you share more details about the challenges that you've encountered in prohibiting or restricting live animal exports or imports by sea through litigation in Brazil?
Sure, thank you, Hira. I think that the primary challenge that we face is the immense economic and political pressure as became the largest exporter of live cattle globally, having exported over 1 million animals in 2025 alone. So 2025 was actually a pretty sad year for us. Um, and when we pursue litigation, we often face a judiciary system that is hesitant to interfere with international trade. And I think that happens in other regions, other countries as well. So I'm not saying that that courts favor the industry. I'm just saying that the court is hesitant to interfere in trade, which is a bit different. So, for instance, the main lawsuit, it is a pending case. The main lawsuit challenging live export in Brazil right now, it was filed by the NGO, the Brazilian NGO Fórum Animal. We, Mercy for Animals, filed multiple amicus briefs. We participate very actively in this case. And the lower federal court actually granted a historic injunction banning live exports nationwide, beautifully recognizing animals as sentient beings with their own dignity. But unfortunately, the appellate court later overturned this ban, and the judges argued that our legal system does not prohibit the export of live animals by sea. And surprisingly, they stated that there was no concrete indication that this kind of transport in itself implies animal cruelty, which we know is not true. So our biggest hurdle is overcoming this deep-seated prioritization of economic interests. We are tackling this problem by partnering with our investigations department, with our strategic litigation program to build indisputable technical evidence of animal suffering in live export, and also evidence of the conditions of the vessels and the environmental impact that this activity has. And just like on a side note, it is very hard right now. It is very hard to file other lawsuits because the court understands that anything that challenges live export right now is connected to this main lawsuit, so they don't even hear our case. They're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide on this case, and so we had a case dismissed due to that. So we are actually talking to other organizations to really stop filing lawsuits to challenge live export, because we are setting negative precedents, and we cannot afford the luxury of having bad precedents for the animals, right? So it's not the I think that the best approach right now is through the Congress, not through litigation. But who knows? The case is still pending. Maybe the Supreme Court will surprise us in a positive manner.
That's so fascinating, and I completely echo that sentiment. I'm also hoping the Supreme Court surprises us all, fingers crossed. And I think you also touch upon like a great theme of strategic litigation specifically, right? And which is that you have to be strategic. So like you really do have to think about setting that precedent, and whether sometimes a case is even worth bringing if it might result in doing more damage than good for animals in the long term. So yeah, thanks for highlighting that. Val, my next question is for you, since we have participants from joining us from all over the world. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what industrial animal agriculture looks like in Mexico? I mean, you've already touched upon it a little bit in your presentation, but I'm more curious about how the way it currently looks, how does that shape the types of legal strategies that are available to advocates?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question, Hira. So basically, what I found throughout the research and the report drafting is that Mexico, even though it's trending towards becoming more intensive, it's still quite heterogeneous in its industry. So that really shapes the kind of legal strategies that we can use as advocates. And I'll talk a bit more about the strategies that I found most promising. But basically, within, as I was saying before in the presentation, within poultry and pork, that's where we have been seeing more industrialization, more consolidation, with systems that look, sadly, more and more so like the US or the global north industrialized systems. So these systems obviously raise many of the concerns that we have with high stocking densities and extreme confinement for animals. And although, as I was saying too, we do have some laws, these are mainly outdated too, and they regulate only some aspects of the production, such as transport and slaughter, but not real regulation within the farms themselves and the way that these animals are raised. So also enforcement is inconsistent. The limited agency capacity also doesn't help. So I found throughout the research too that one of the strategies that advocates can use, and this feels especially promising, is to use something that's called amparo litigation, which basically means that agencies are compelled to fulfill their regulatory and oversight capacities or obligations. So in this way, they can actually carry out the inspections that they need and the oversight that's mandated to them by law. And within the system, I was talking about pigs and chickens mainly. For chickens, it's quite alarming because layer hens, for example, Mexico is the highest consumer per capita of eggs in the world. And SADER, which is our Secretariat of Rural Development, similar to the USDA, SADER has a manual, a very outdated manual too, that suggests a space in centimeters squared per bird. And this space that's suggested is even lower than the US sheet of paper size. So that's really, really alarming. And 80% of farms have over 700,000 hens there. So it's becoming quite industrialized. And in the other hand, in the cattle sector, we do have something that's quite unique, I think, to Latin America. And this is called a dual purpose system. And I can speak a bit more about that since it's a topic that interests me, because my background is in the science field. So these dual purpose systems provide meat and provide milk from cows and from their calves. They tend to be smaller scale, and they tend to be prevalent in tropical areas. So also in Brazil, I know they are prevalent there too. And they tend to be low technology, low input. They're based on rotational grazing. So I think that the welfare issues that we see in these types of systems are less significant, maybe, but also there remains a lot of welfare concerns. But also, since we don't have a lot of registries for these very rural areas, it's also hard to track and also hard to implement litigation strategies in that regard. Similar to these is the poultry sector. We still have an important poultry sector that's involved in rural zones, and that's backyard farming, basically, where guajolotes or turkeys are normally raised. And as I was saying before, there's a lack of registries, so not really a lot of information that we can use moving forward. And just to finish my answer, I think that the strategies that I found tend to be more incremental and welfare based rather than constitutional based still, although that's also a promising avenue in the future.
Thank you so much, Val. I think what you've said, or one of the themes that you highlighted in your answer, is something that in our report we saw was pretty consistent across all 4 jurisdictions studied, which is that a lot of times it's not about creating new laws or like creating new mechanisms, but just trying to enforce existing ones, or trying just to try and force agencies, which is usually some form of like a Department of Agriculture, to do their job. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is for you, Gauri. You won so many landmark cases, and I also think like this is maybe a phenomenon that is maybe in some good ways and then some bad ways unique to a lot of global south countries. Like, I'm originally from Pakistan, and I know this also happens in Pakistan, where judges will often make like really sweeping statements like, all animals are now legal persons, but oftentimes that doesn't really translate the way we think it would translate, right, in practice. So because you've been in this field a lot longer than I have, you've done so much great work, you've won so many landmark cases, but we often see this gap between what a judgment says and what actually happens on the ground. So, in your experience, how can litigators design their cases to ensure they don't just result in victory on paper, but in actual monitored change for animals?
Lira, I think we treat every case like a child, and then it takes a village to raise it. So once you file something, first you have to plan for it. You have to make space in your life for a case, and when the time is right, when everybody is ready, then we file it. And when it's there, then you have to feed it with data. You have to take all the feedback from the courts. You have to go back to the field, collect more data to counter everything that the other stakeholders are saying. Strategically work with stakeholders out of court, work with the industry so that their lashback is a little controlled. Build capacity of those who can support your side. For instance, I'll give you a example from what we're doing with the poultry sector. We have like just about 600 million poultry birds in this country on any given day. That's like a massive number. They're not, and these are just egg-laying hens. We're not even including broilers. So they're not going to go out of cages in a day, not with any court order, not with even a government order, not with any law. So we just decided we'll do our best. One, to at least get secure some kind of a handle in court. We got in 2018, we got an order from the Delhi High Court saying no new battery cages across the country. We didn't stop there. We went to the banking institutions, the financial institutions, and said immediately you have to stop lending to battery cages because no farmer can make a battery cage farm with his own money. He has to have finances taken from the banks, and if there's a check there, then those are so many farms that you've prevented from coming. We immediately jump started into training, farmers in cage-free practices. We collaborated with the Central Avian Research Institute, formally signed an MOU with them, created audiovisual training modules for, and till now we've trained about 10,000 farmers, many of which have gone around to transitioning from battery cage to cage-free farms. We also then, in due course, got we made India's first environmentally controlled cage-free farm and a training center for farmers. We got 4 state governments to sign up for a train the trainer program. So then we got the farmers to assemble the small, cage-free and free-range farmers to assemble into a cooperative society. All of this while we just have one titch button of an order, which could have just gotten ignored somewhere. But this cooperative society, which cooperative societies gain a lot of favor with the Indian government because they represent small farmers. So these are actually small farmers. There's no denying that. Got them collected so that they have a voice. Then we got them to, interact and network with the Hiltons and the Marriotts and the Sodexos and the Compasses and the big institutional buyers so that they could secure businesses. So we are then on the side of farmer livelihood, which is such a nice catchphrase for the government. And then even courts are happy if you're doing something like that to say, the large cartelized industry, organized players are suppressing the small farmers. The small farmer is fine. He's doing backyard. He's fine. So just stitching the narrative, take a small victory, spin a narrative around it, and build a lot of capacity in the environment to absorb and magnify that court victory. I mean, it's rare and precious to have a good word from courts about it, farmed animals, at least. I mean, now India's going even to the dogs, metaphorically, but it's I mean, there's a litigation happening in the Supreme Court. It's gone a little south when it comes to dogs, but farmed animals generally are just counted in numbers. It doesn't matter that we are the one of the largest livestock population in the world. We have 100 billion cattle. We have 300 million, sorry, 100 million billion fish. 300 million cattle, 10 million pigs. But they're just numbers. Nobody finds them relatable. Nobody, most of the judges, even when it comes to compassion, they work from a point of view of ego, whatever they can relate with. Probably an animal, an elephant, they would find themselves to be drawn towards more than probably an issue of pigs. So we don't take them that side. Of course, we use science and data and everything. Once that happens and we get a little bit of a victory, then we have to make the bed fertile enough for that seed to actually grow into a tree.
Wow, that was such an amazing and impressive answer, and that is such impressive work you've done in India. I think yeah, so much of what you said resonated with me, and I'm sure with other people in the virtual room as well. Just like a court victory, a judicial victory is often the first step in the process, really, of making some change for animals, because like court orders themselves are, not automatic. not necessarily always automatically enforceable. Someone has to go and get them enforced. Yeah, and also this narrative of like, I do think that this is again maybe a common theme, and Valeria and Paula, maybe you disagree with me, but I do think this narrative of like big ag coming in to often sometimes, or not often, but sometimes with like foreign investment to push small farmers out of business. I do think this is an effective strategy in a lot of countries to really get courts and policymakers to pay attention to the issue of industrial animal agriculture. Thanks too for highlighting that. Paula, my next question is for you. You briefly mentioned the intersection between animal rights and human rights, which again, I guess, is maybe related to the small farmers issue, maybe not. Do you think that arguments such as the fight against modern slavery or illegal deforestation in Brazil, can be used for litigation against the agribusiness and in defense of the rights of farmed animals?
Yeah, thank you. So definitely, I absolutely think that this is something that we can explore. In Brazil, there is this really strong intersection between human rights violations, environmental crimes, and animal exploitation. I think that's true in other regions as well. Um, I think it is important to highlight that most of Brazil cattle raising is grass-fed cattle. So CAFOs are not that popular for cattle raising. The same isn't true for egg-laying hens, and I hate saying egg-laying hens that are exploited to lay eggs for us, but you know what I mean. So the situation is that uh, data shows that cattle raising is the leader, the absolute leader in the number of workers rescued from modern slave labor, and also the primary driver of illegal deforestation, particularly in ecosystems like Amazonia and Cerrado. So it often involves the invasion, it also involves the invasion of indigenous lands. So because the meat industry is also fails at traceability, especially regarding indirect suppliers, uh, some voluntary agreements like the National Pact for the Eradication of Slave Labor can be highly effective, can be highly ineffective, and it gives us an opportunity, a strategic opportunity, so we can leverage international due diligence laws like the ones in France or in the European Union in general to hold these multinational companies accountable for human rights and environmental violations that occur deep in their supply chain. So it does affect minor or smaller producers, but I think it affects the big ag industry more than those producers, because they are the ones that are massively um, uh, uh, impacting the rights of workers, animals, and the environment. So we've been successful in environmental litigation where cattle ranchers were held, not we MFA, but we as a country, successful environmental litigation where cattle ranchers were held criminally liable for illegally occupying national parks and indigenous reserves, and use these human rights and environmental arguments is often highly effective. But it is an indirect way to halt the expansion of industrial animal agriculture. So not that directly related to animal welfare, right? But one thing that I would like to mention is that we have to be very vigilant in Brazil for these strategies, because they can also encourage the growth of CAFLs. Once you use, especially environmental protection arguments, if you if you use the land to grow corn and soy to feed animals, and you're also using deforestation is also used for grass-fed cattle. And so if you're using environmental arguments, and that's when environmental law and animal law, they really conflict. So when you use those arguments, you can, like, we're starting to have this answer from the industry that, oh, that's okay, we're gonna stop deforestation by confining those animals. So just, I think we should be aware of that and understand that which it's not an either or situation. CAFOs are not a good environmental solution for anything. But so yeah, just make sure that we hold hands with environmental protection organizations so that animals don't pay the bill in the end.
Wow, that was really brilliantly worded. I really like that last sentence and really all of your answer. And I think you're so right in also identifying. Firstly, I think the statistic is like, correct me if I'm wrong, Paula, but something like 70% of all deforested land in the Amazon is being used currently for cattle ranching. So that's a huge number. And I think you're also right in like thinking about, which also I think links a little bit to Gauri's answer. You really have to think about, okay, what next? Like, okay, you stop this one activity, and then what's happening after that? Like, is it just moving to a more harmful system? Is it like, are you actually meaningfully engaging in just transition where, you know, in an ideal world, raising cattle stops, right? As opposed to like raising cattle in a different way. So yeah, thank you so much for that. That was a really great answer. Okay. Well, my next question for you kind of links to what you said, what you previously said about Amparo actions. That's, I think, a really interesting tool. And it sounds a little bit like it sounds a little bit to me like a writ of mandamus or like a mandamus lawsuit. So how have advocates used, firstly, is that a correct characterization of Amparo? And also, secondly, how have advocates used this tool to push agencies to enforce existing animal welfare or other laws?
Yes, thank you, Hira. So yes, as you said, it is similar to a writ of mandamus in the US, and they are quite the mechanism in Mexico for individuals and for organizations. They can be used for animal welfare cases, as I saw in some of the research, but also they're used regularly to challenge government actions or omissions against an individual and its constitutional rights or guarantees. So these amparo basically in Spanish, it means protection, aid, or shelter. So they have been used to address, as I was saying before, enforcement gaps and to basically force agencies such as SADER. This was the case that I wanted to talk about. There are two cases that involve SADER, which, as I mentioned, is similar to the USDA, in which organizations have pushed via an amparo litigation or an amparo lawsuit SADER to do its job, basically. So in one of the cases, it was this civil association versus SADER, and it's not directly related to farmed animals, but I think it's quite relevant because it can open doors so that advocates can use it in the future for farmed animal litigation. This was related to the enforcement of protection standards with regard to bullfighting in a state called Aguascalientes. And basically what they claimed, which is, I think, quite interesting, is that SADER had failed to ensure compliance with NOM 033, which is the one I mentioned in the presentation that relates to humane slaughter methods. So the amparo was granted, and in this case, it was granted because it's SADER's duty under the Federal Animal Health Act to do this type of thing. So it was very curious how they used this strategy. I thought it was quite innovative. The amparo was granted, and this just goes to show the judiciary's, in this case, willingness or openness to compel SADER, which is a huge agency, to fulfill its obligations. So in the future, I think this could be used, or a similar amparo lawsuit could be used to fulfill inspection duties in other types of settings, and not only in slaughterhouses. So yeah, I think this is quite interesting. And also the fact that this case resonated so strongly politically and socially, I think that exactly a year ago, so March 18, 2025, a bill was passed to ban violent bullfighting in Mexico City. So still there's some allowance of the classical tradition, but without spears, without matadores, without physical violence. So I think in this way the case resonated so much that this law was passed, and it's amazing. Even though it doesn't involve farmed animals, there was another case that does involve farm animals in which an amparo was also successful, and this one had to do with the Humane League Mexico a few years back against SADER again. And basically they claimed that SADER was failing to advance animal welfare relating to the egg industry, because there hasn't been, to date, I think, there hasn't been any regulation passed with regards to labeling of eggs. So there's no caged versus cage-free versus free range. There's no regulation. The government doesn't get involved with that. Yes, the appellate court agreed with the Humane League, and the case basically challenges this regulatory inaction. And I think that's also quite a promising route, even though I'm not aware of something being enacted yet, but at least judges were open to hearing the case and did agree with the amparo.
Thank you so much, Valeria, for those awesome summaries. I do think that something like amparo, mandamus, Administrative Procedure Act litigation in the US, like these are really powerful tools because, of course, with agencies, not that agencies are easy to go after, not necessarily, but like sometimes they are easier to go after than like asking the legislature, especially on like a national level, to change something or to pass a whole new law that would also then need to be enforced. So at the end of the day, I think sometimes like going after an agency is really the best way to go about it. So yeah, thanks for highlighting that. And you also touched on something that it was also a common theme, I think, in our research, which was what the religious, cultural factors that influence a lot of these cases. So that brings me to my next question for you, Gauri, which is, from Jallikattu to Gadi Mai, your cases sit at the intersection of animal welfare and deeply charged political and cultural identity issues. So how do you, when it gets to, something that could potentially maybe just get out of your control or like become a big controversy or a big national conversation, how do you then decide which battles to fight legally, whether if it's like a hot button cultural issue, whether you really want to get into it or not, when it does impact a lot of animal welfare, but at the same time is a culturally sensitive topic? Oh, sorry, you muted.
There. So, of course, politically, culturally sensitive cases, we have done a fair share of that. And my learning is that we always must rely on hard evidence and science and know the pulse before you go to court and face a cultural opposition and be on the other side of a narrative, a cultural narrative, because that polarizes people and you don't know which side of the fence the bench is sitting on. So I'll give you an example. So we skirt around it and try to approach it from a purely logical and scientific angle. For instance, when it came to farmed dogs and dog meat in a state in India called Nagaland, we had to, of course, the central law prohibited dog meat. An interpretation of the central law prohibits dog meat. That's what you can say at best. And we got the state government to agree with us. And suddenly there was this dog meat lobby, the Dog Meat Traders Association, that filed a matter in court, seeking their traders' rights and got a stay on the order. We went back, fought for 3 years in the High Court. The judgment is reserved, but we're pretty certain that the arguments have all been on our side purely on science. We put so many studies on record linking dog meat with public health, rabies hazard, stating international, trends on dog meat which have gone down, South Korea, etc. Of course, completely negating the cultural aspect of it. In fact, saying it's not culturally important and that this is a recent phenomenon altogether. Poked holes in the we have been eating it for thousands of years, but saying no, you didn't. You just picked it up some time back. So that way, I think we remain on logic, evidence, and science, and that sort of I'm hoping will help us. If not in the High Court, then in the India has only one Supreme Court. Of course, every state has a High Court. So that's how we operate. So if we don't succeed in the High Court, we definitely will in the Supreme Court. Another example is that of pig rearing. Rearing culturally in India is done by a specific community that is marginalized. It's a community that is sort of at at a disadvantage. Certain castes, etc. And we knew that challenging them and expecting higher welfare from them is only going to give us a massive lashback, and this is not a battle we want to fight. There were challenges with communally sort of evoking their unity and then getting a whole industry organized when we were actually not beginning to do that. So we did not go on the cruelty aspect at all. We went to the National Green Tribunal, that is the Environment Tribunal. And we said that, oh, but then this tons of solid and liquid waste that is generated from pig farms is making people sick. So after a lot of field work, we got that data. We went to the courts and said, oh, this is a purely environmental hazard and therefore needs guidelines, which are mandatory, of course, under the Water Act, Air Act. Now we won that case. Now we're working with the government to develop those guidelines, and those guidelines would have checks and balances. We are in the process of, in the next few months, India will have their big guidelines, which would have siting criteria. You can make it here, you can't make it there, space allowance, disposal, of course, of solid liquid waste, but space allowance and many other things stitched together, especially addressing the swill feeding of pigs, which is very, very common. That again adds to exacerbates the environmental impact. So all of that we're trying to stitch together in the environmental guidelines for pigs, for which we now have court directives. So culturally, we try to skirt around it and stay on the irrefutable science and logic and evidence.
Thank you so much. I think that insight was so important because in many ways, I think when it comes to industrial animal agriculture, you can't avoid the culture, the cultural connotations of it, right? Because just everybody eats food. So like no matter which animal you're talking about, it's a cultural issue. Like food is deeply personal and deeply cultural. And so like I think, yeah, those examples were really, really insightful and those strategies are like to try and not even bring culture into it because that's obviously going to be inevitable. I think in any it's going to be important for someone or most likely some large group of people. So thank you for that. Paula, my next question for you is that you mentioned defensive litigation as part of your strategy. How does the meat industry in Brazil use the legal system to retaliate against animal protection NGOs? And how do you prepare your organization for this? So, like, is there some kind of legal tool? Is there like a few strategies that you deploy consistently? Yes, how do you deal with that?
Thank you, Hira. And I have to say, I'm just so happy to be here. I feel like I'm amongst animal law celebrities, and I just loving this. But so in Brazil, we don't have a gag law, so we fortunately this trend didn't get to our country, but we still face a very significant lack of understanding or a strong culture regarding freedom of expression. Maybe this has to do with the fact that we had dictatorship for a long time, but also like we're seeing like even in countries where the democratic culture has always been very strong, now are facing this backlash, right? So I think uh, it is what happens in most democracies. Uh, but it is interesting because at MFA, we don't really face many lawsuits in any other region, but in Brazil, we do face lots of lawsuits from companies against our organization. So the meat industry exploits this uh, the lack of free speech culture by using the legal system to silence organizations like MFA. And we have to be extremely careful with these lawsuits. They usually claim moral damages or allege violations of intellectual property rights. And it usually happens as a direct retaliation of our corporate campaigns or the release of undercover investigations. So to prepare for this, answering your question more directly, to prepare for this, we shifted our mindset. Instead of that, we treat defensive litigation as a core part of our strategic litigation. And I don't think like so not being reactive towards it, but being strategic about it. And how do we do that? We know that these defense cases create a critical legal precedence, not just for ourselves, but for animals, for other animal protection organizations, either favorable or unfavorable. So we proactively partner with specialized lawyers working very closely with outside counsel to really defend our cases. So have like really strong defense in those cases brought against our organization. And we focus on securing free speech and protect the public's fundamental right to know the reality behind factory farming. So using consumer law protection to in those cases. And we've never lost a lawsuit. So far, it's working. We still have many pending cases, but all the cases that are not pending anymore were successful. And recently, we are like, this is a very beautiful moment for us because this strategic defensive litigation actually led to a recent landmark decision by the Brazilian Supreme Court guaranteeing free speech for all social movements, not just animal protection organizations, but all social movements, and establishing clear requirements for cases of moral damages. And that case was the organizers of a bullfighting event brought this lawsuit against an animal protection organization after this animal protection organization launched a campaign talking about animal suffering. And this case became the paradigm case. This case was selected by the Supreme Court to be the case that would establish the parameters for free speech rights for social justice movements and moral damages. So seeing animal law and animal protection organizations being at the center of this discussion, being at the center of the discussion regarding democracy, free speech, is just beautiful. And the outcome was so positive. So many of our cases are pending because the courts were waiting for the Supreme Court decision in order to decide our cases. So keep in touch, because I hope that I'll bring more positive results for you. Hopefully, all the pending cases will be, even those that we are losing, because like some of them do not look good for us. But after this Supreme Court decision, we are very hopeful that we will overturn these negative decisions.
That's amazing. Congratulations, Paula. That's phenomenal work. Like, yeah, and it's always, well, not always, but it's very heartening when and when animal law cases make their way to the Supreme Court, because then you know you have potential to make like nationwide precedent and hopefully positive precedent. So all fingers crossed, your winning streak keeps going, and you never lose a case. Um, so yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, we do want to like leave some questions for the like some time for audience Q&A at towards in the last 5 minutes. So I will quickly ask Valeria and Gauri a final couple of questions. So Valeria, for you, what looking ahead, what legal reforms or litigation strategies do you think you could most effectively improve farmed animal welfare in Mexico?
Yes, that's a great question, Hira. I think that going back to what Paula was saying with regards to using environmental rights and human rights frameworks to advance animal protection seems really promising, even though it's not the outcome that most advocates would like, I guess, because we're not truly advancing animal interests because of who they are inherently, but because we're linking them to some sort of human harm. But still, it's a pathway forward. Actually, there was a case precisely that dealt with these two frameworks. It dealt with a pig CAFO that was developing in Homun, which is an area in Yucatan in the southeast of Mexico. And it was housing over 49,000 pigs with tremendous waste disposal. And this area is particularly significant because it has a ring of cenotes, and cenotes are these geological formations based in limestone, in which water can trickle down very easily and just create a huge environmental issue with water pollution. Drinking water, too, for the community was an issue. And cenotes as well, they are part of who these communities are, and they have been respected and honored for years. So part of the plaintiffs were guardians of the cenotes, these Mayan communities. Indigenous rights too played a role, and indigenous rights were important because, and I didn't know this until I did the research, and I think it's quite interesting to mention, indigenous people have to be informed and give consent for projects before they happen. Obviously, they weren't asked, so it was a huge thing. And also the constitutional right to a healthy environment and access to clean water was also part of the legal challenge that was brought there. And in that sense, it also speaks about the opportunity to make change for future generations, which is also, I think, quite important. So yes, considering these two lenses, both human rights and environmental rights paired together, I think that's a good way to move forward, advancing animal cases in an indirect way. And just to finish with this case, the court did grant an injunction to halt the project. And also it's quite impressive to mention how potential allyships or collaborations between different social movements can play a role for not only for Mexico, but also in other countries, as we've been seeing too in the US. And the other thing I wanted to mention looking ahead is that when I was doing this report, basically, I don't think there was a lot going on with this new law initiative that has been passed. It has been introduced, sorry, within the Chamber of Deputies, and it's building up upon the new amendment to Article 73 that I was talking about in the presentation, that grants Congress the authority and the need to legislate on animal welfare and animal protection. So building upon that, it's very urgent that this law gets passed. It will address animal welfare concerns across different species. We're trying to even include fish, and it's been organized by several stakeholders, several organizations working in Mexico together to revise, edit, proofread the law. And it still hasn't passed, but we're hoping it passes soon. And also worth mentioning, Article 3. This is also one of the reformed articles in the Constitution. It's still too early to know how it will influence education moving forward, but it basically mandates a need to include animal welfare in schools of all sorts, of all levels. So that's quite impressive. I think it will create more uniformity for even regulations moving forward, and education for everyone in Mexico about recognizing animal needs. And it could also be used as a future avenue for litigation. The same with the animal law initiative. If it does pass soon, I think there will be potential to test cases with this new law.
Thank you so much. That is really impressive. And yeah, I hope that, we get lots of good news from Mexico, given these new constitutional protections for animals and this mandate for humane education. Okay, so I can keep going, but I also realize we're 10 minutes away from ending, and I did want to give folks in the audience a chance to ask questions if they have any. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, pop them in the chat, unmute yourself, or I can keep going with my Q&A. Questions? Oh, so we got one. So Sabrina's asking, how can strategic litigation work in systems where the main problem isn't the law, but the lack of evidence and investigation to support animal cruelty cases? That's a great question.
I can take that one. I think it's for everyone, right?
Yeah, anybody. Yeah, whoever.
Okay, so we're very lucky at MFA that we do have an investigations department, which I think that brings us like it is a very powerful tool. And courts often say, like in the live export case that I mentioned, that there's not enough evidence of animal suffering in this activity. So like I totally agree with you, Sabrina, that this is an obstacle that we need to overcome. But I think Gori mentioned the need for us to have scientific evidence, strong scientific evidence. So partnering with animal welfare laboratories, partnering with economists, universities. So anyone who produce reliable scientific data is key for us to advance in strategic litigation. I think that if we are purely idealistic and we build a strong case in our heads, in our minds, right? That in theory, the law is on our side. Our arguments make perfect sense. If you're vegan, woo, even more so. So we have like this beautiful legal thesis that can be defended using the law, using the Constitution, using common sense. And then we bring these to court, and the judge doesn't really see things like the same way. And for us, it is frustrating, of course. So if we have to be less idealistic, more pragmatic, understand that the world doesn't see things the same way as we do. And I think science is, I don't think that, I'm sure that science is on our side. So let's use that in our favor. If you're not as lucky as we are to partner with undercover investigators, then I would say partner with universities, partner with scholars, partner with people who are producing good science, because science is on our side for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Other questions? Okay, in the meantime, I can ask another question. Gauri, this one's for you. You brought a competition law case against the National Egg Coordination Committee using antitrust law to challenge the egg industry's pricing cartel. How can advocates across different legal systems identify and use kind of unconventional legal tools for animal protection more broadly?
So I'd say just employ a lot of lateral thinking and scan the legal environment. There are so many, I'll give some examples. For instance, this came to us because we were interacting with industry as we interact with all stakeholders in every litigation. And industry, sort of the feedback that we got was that the small cage-free farmers were not allowed to exist in the market because there's a cartel that is sort of manipulating the market and deciding the price and keeping it artificially low so that the poultry farmers, I don't like to call them farmers, poultry persons, basically became tenant farmers. They had nothing of their own. Of extremely vertically integrated industry had captured the lives of these people and were sort of making them sell eggs at whatever price they wanted. And the first thing to go was the welfare of the bird in the entire process, because after all, he has to squeeze out some little profit from it. So we then explored. We then spoke to a lot of people outside of our echo chamber, not just within the animal welfare networks. We went to lawyers who practice in other fields, corporate fields. Finally, we found that there's a Competition Act which prohibits such anti-competitive sort of practices, and there's a Competition Commission. So we went there. Later on, when we tasted blood and thought, this seems interesting, that you can go out of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960 and out of the environmental law, which are the conventional playing fields. We thought, how about some other, it does sound odd that the cartel is called National Egg Coordination Committee. No other organization which is non-government calls itself national. So there is a Names and Emblems Act in India, which prohibits the use of such words for non-government operators. And then we challenged them there and won again. It's another thing that they've appealed, and we're still in that appeal, but we won the first round, where they're not allowed to call themselves National Egg Coordination Committee and masquerade as government, perform a sovereign duty of regulating price, basically just manipulating the market all the way through. Just go through to unconventional. For instance, there are two huge landfill mountains in the capital of India, which is Delhi, and there are dairies running in them. Cattle are actually, thousands of them, grazing in the landfill, which is called legacy waste over here. So we did not say cruelty. We said food safety threat. We got the milk tested, found that it had aflatoxins, which is a mold which is carcinogenic. It came out that more than 50% of the milk from these cattle had aflatoxin. And therefore, promptly the court had no mercy on those two sort of large dairy areas, and has given an order to have them shifted elsewhere. Some of them will, of course, not, they will probably switch to other trades because that was something they wanted to do in that particular place. So they'll retain the land and do something else instead. So destabilizing and diffusing is something that you can do very well with other laws, so that you challenge the status quo and you don't leave things to fester the way they sort of have always been. And for that, I think we need to step out of our comfort zones and our echo chambers and think in terms of the plethora of laws in the ecosystem that exists that can. For instance, now we're challenging the egg industry on labeling, from a consumer angle, because sometimes you find egg packets saying brain boosting egg, turmeric enriched egg. Like, how do you even do that? It's so misleading. How do you brain boost somebody with an egg? So there we found, I mean, it is, all law is logic, and this is illogical. So there must be a law. It's just about us finding it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I, for one, completely agree with you. Like, if we can't have our ideal tools, we have to use everything that we do have. We have 2 minutes left, and we have a question with lots of upvotes. So I definitely want to ask this one. It's from Professor Senatori. Gauri spoke of the importance of making interconnected arguments and not appealing to empathy. Paula's comments underscored the risk that the industry may solve these interconnected arguments like environmental harm, and the backlash can just be to confine the animals. Is there a space to continue to develop the law through appealing to empathy? And if so, how?
That's a tough one. Uh, do you want to take that, Corey, or can I
You go
share my
first, and
thoughts?
I'll add my
Okay.
2 penny later.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. I think that most lawyers do not understand the food system and how it works. So we don't really understand how the industry works. We don't understand the contracts that they sign among themselves. We don't understand the scale of things. So and most people like animals. I think it's very rare for us to meet someone who says, I hate animals, like all animals. So I think that for shifting narratives, the empathy is very, very important, and we should continue to put a lot of effort and energy in public awareness campaigns and educational campaigns. But when it comes to lawmaking and litigation, I agree with Gauri that we need to be very pragmatic, as I said, and understand how the industry works. Sometimes empathy will be a good argument. Sometimes animal sentience and animal dignity will be a very good argument. Sometimes you have a Supreme Court that recognizes intrinsic value of non-human animals, but sometimes it will not be. And that you have to study hard, and you have to understand what the problem that you're trying to solve. So I don't have a better answer other than know what you're getting yourself into. Study hard.
I'll just add to what Paula said very briefly. It is true that you can solve the environment problem if you put methane digesters in a dairy farm. You can solve the food safety problem by probably beyond pasteurizing, pasteurize the milk, or solve everything. You can solve lactose intolerance. You can everything is solvable except for cruelty. So we're acutely aware of it. That's the cruelty cannot be resolved other than by being gentle to the animal. So other arguments we definitely use strategically in court, but while we are completely aware that the departments, the industry may resolve that, but the final card is always that of the welfare of the animal, which is intrinsic to the whole, to every case that goes. But again, when it comes to public policy and courts, we talk more interconnectedness. But when we talk to corporate policy makers, we speak only welfare and nothing else. It always is. Then it is, sustainable development goals and everything can be on the side. But it is welfare of the animal that the moral compass for private policymakers. That is what we prioritize um, in our conversations with private parties. With governments, it's slightly more. It has to be a little more interconnected and court. But otherwise, I completely agree with what Paula said.
Thank you so much, Gauri. Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great sentence. You can't solve cruelty. You have to Yeah, the animals need more than just environmental or public health protection. So thank you so much for your time today, all three of you. This was really fantastic. I learned so much. And thanks to our audience for being here, and yeah, and of course to our amazing panelists for their time today and for their help with the report. So yes, please do go read the report if you want more information on any of these jurisdictions. And thank you.